When the scoreboard starts steering, measurement as governance, you notice it the day your work starts to feel like feeding a dashboard. The easiest tasks get done first because they are visible, and the hardest work waits because it is harder to count. A meeting ends not with a shared understanding, but with an argument over which number really matters. In small ways at first, the scoreboard starts steering the game. And the tension is this: measurement was supposed to help us see reality, yet it can quietly become the reality we serve. A metric becomes the mission when it scales into a governing constraint, shaping attention, incentives, and identity, until the organization optimizes the proxy as if it were the purpose. In this reflection, I will treat measurement as a form of governance, not merely a tool for reporting, but a system of constraints that distributes attention and sets what is safe to ignore. I will not claim that metrics are inherently corrupting, nor that we can operate without measurement. I will claim something narrower and more disciplined. Proxy drift is often an emergent outcome of rational local choices under uncertainty, and its risks compound over time horizons when feedback is delayed or misaligned. Begin with a simple assumption: most people do not wake up deciding to betray the mission. Most people wake up deciding to do well in the environment they are in. That environment is made of constraints: time, budgets, approvals, reputations, tools, and among the strongest constraints is what gets measured and rewarded. To speak clearly, we need a few terms. First, metric. A metric is a number we track to represent something we care about. It can be a count, a rate, a score, a threshold, a percentile, a ranking. Its virtue is compression. It turns complexity into something portable. The cost is loss. It discards context. Example in plain language: if you care about whether a service is reliable, you might track minutes of downtime. That metric captures something real. But it does not capture everything. It might miss slow performance, confusing failures, or the experience of people who are excluded long before downtime appears. Second, proxy. A proxy is the metric's relationship to the thing you actually value. You do not measure trust directly. You measure something that you believe stands in for trust: repeat visits, complaint rates, referrals, survey answers. A proxy is not a lie. It is an approximation. Example: if you care about learning, you might use test scores as a proxy. Test scores can reflect learning, but they can also reflect test-taking skill, coaching, or narrow memorization. The proxy is informative, but it is not identical to the value. Third, proxy drift. Proxy drift is the process by which the proxy and the underlying value separate over time. Sometimes this drift is accidental. The world changes and the proxy no longer tracks the value as well as it once did. Sometimes the drift is strategic. People adapt to the measurement, improving the number without improving the reality. Often it is neither villainy nor incompetence. It is adaptation under constraint. Example: if a team is judged by response time, it may answer quickly with minimal substance. The metric improves. The underlying value, helpfulness, may not. Fourth, governance. In this context, governance is the set of rules, incentives, oversight practices, and decision pathways that determine what actions are encouraged, what actions are discouraged, and what actions are invisible. Governance is not merely a committee. Governance is the structure of what is permitted, constrained, and ignored. Governance is part of the system. With these terms, we can name a common pattern. Measurement begins as observation and becomes constraint. A metric starts as a flashlight and becomes a steering wheel. Now, a three-horizon framing, because proxy drift behaves differently across time. Short horizon, days to quarters. Metrics are used to coordinate. They reduce confusion. They accelerate decisions. In this horizon, measurement often looks like competence. Mid-horizon, quarters to years. People learn the rules. They discover how the metric is interpreted, which exceptions are tolerated, what counts as a win. The metric becomes a language for negotiating resources, status, and blame. In this horizon, optimization begins to reshape behavior. Long horizon, years to decades. Systems ossify. The metric becomes embedded in hiring, promotion, budgeting, product design, contracts, and narratives of identity. At this horizon, the measurement regime becomes culture. Proxy drift can become structural. We also need to state assumptions and limits. Assumption 1. Attention is scarce. Whatever is measured becomes easier to talk about, and therefore easier to prioritize. Assumption 2. People respond to incentives, including subtle incentives like praise, visibility, and perceived safety. Not everyone responds the same way, but the aggregate system tilts. Assumption 3. Metrics tend to be sticky. Once a metric is tied to reporting, accountability, or pride, changing it becomes politically and psychologically costly. Even without politics in the narrow sense, there is inertia. Model limit. Not everything that matters can be reliably measured, and not everything measurable should be optimized. Some values are qualitative, contextual, or only visible through long feedback loops. Additionally, our models of causality are imperfect. A metric can correlate with outcomes without causing them, and optimizing it can break the correlation. So we proceed with disciplined humility. Metrics can clarify, but they can also distort. Proxies can guide, but they can also drift. Governance can protect, but it can also narrow the world to what fits on a spreadsheet. And because uncertainty is real, the question is not whether measurement is good or bad, but how measurement behaves as a governing constraint when it scales. The core paradox is simple to state and difficult to live with. We want speed and safety. We want capability and control. We want local gain and global stability. Metrics promise to reconcile these tensions by making them legible. But legibility is not the same as truth, and optimization is not the same as wisdom. Consider speed versus safety. A metric for speed, tickets closed, deliveries made, time to response, creates momentum. Momentum is valuable, yet the same metric can make safety work appear as friction. Safety work often looks like slower progress because it is investment. Reviews, tests, careful deliberation, redundancy. If the measurement regime privileges speed, safety becomes a tax people try to avoid. If the measurement regime privileges safety in simplistic ways, counting checklists completed rather than risks reduced, then safety becomes theater. Either way, the metric's gravitational pull reshapes behavior. Consider capability versus control. We measure output to increase capability, features shipped, tasks completed, throughput, utilization. But when the system is judged primarily on output, control mechanisms, documentation, audits, review processes, guardrails are experienced as overhead. A common local response is to simplify governance in the name of agility. That local choice can be rational, yet at scale, reduced control can amplify tail risk, low probability failures with high consequence. The system becomes more capable in the median case, less resilient in the worst case. Consider local gain versus global stability. A team or individual can improve a metric by optimizing their slice of the system. Handing off problems, shifting burdens to another group, selecting easy cases, delaying difficult work. In the local frame, this looks like success. In the global frame, it can degrade the overall system. Hidden queues grow, complexity accumulates, trust erodes between teams. The metric records local victory, while the system accumulates systemic debt. Now, how does a metric become the mission without anyone deciding it should? It happens through a series of small, reasonable steps. Step 1. We choose what is measurable. This is often a pragmatic decision. Under uncertainty, we prefer the legible. If we can count it, we can manage it. We tell ourselves it is only a proxy, only a partial view. But measurement has a tendency to become the language of legitimacy. What can be counted becomes what can be defended. Step 2. We attach consequences. At first, consequences are soft. Recognition, attention in meetings, inclusion in updates. Then consequences become harder. Budgets, performance evaluation, staffing, promotion, continued existence of a program. This is not necessarily malicious. It is governance. Scarce resources require decisions. Metrics make decisions appear fair. Step 3. People adapt. Adaptation is not corruption. It is learning. People discover how to make the number move. They also discover which aspects of reality are not measured and therefore not protected. They do what the system makes safe. Step 4. The proxy becomes identity. Soon the metric is no longer a tool, it is a story. We are the group that delivers fastest. We are the group with the highest score. We are the group that never misses the target. Identity is powerful governance because it operates without explicit enforcement. People enforce it on themselves and one another. Step 5. Drift becomes invisible. Because the metric is improving, it becomes harder to argue that anything is wrong. The number provides reassurance. Meanwhile, the underlying value may be stagnating or degrading. The organization sees what it measures and stops seeing what it does not. This is proxy drift as an emergent property. We should also distinguish at least two failure modes, one local, one systemic. A local failure mode, gaming the metric. This is the familiar one. When the metric becomes tied to evaluation, people find ways to increase the number without increasing the value. They choose easier cases, redefine categories, split work into smaller units to inflate throughput, close items prematurely, or shift burdens elsewhere. The metric becomes a target, and by becoming a target, it stops being a good measure. The local system becomes performative. A systemic failure mode, metric monoculture. Here, the problem is not individual gaming, but organizational convergence on a narrow set of metrics that become the sole currency of decision. Over time, diversity of signals collapses. Qualitative reports are discounted as anecdotal. Long-term indicators are ignored because they lag. People stop raising issues that cannot be expressed in the accepted numbers. The system loses sensory richness. When the environment changes, the organization becomes brittle because it has trained itself to perceive only what fits the existing instruments. There are other failure modes that often accompany these. One is optimization myopia. The system improves what it can measure and neglects what it cannot. This can lead to a strange outcome where performance rises on paper while lived experience worsens. Another is threshold fixation. When a metric is tied to a threshold, pass-fail, target-miss, behavior clusters around the threshold rather than around the underlying goal. People do what is needed to cross the line, then stop. Another is measurement debt. Metrics accumulate like code does. Old metrics remain in place after their purpose has expired. New metrics are added for new concerns. Eventually, the system spends more time reporting than learning. The organization becomes a reporting machine that confuses visibility with control. Now place all of this under the lens of time horizon. In the short horizon, measurement solves coordination problems. It reduces uncertainty. It allows comparisons. It helps leaders and teams allocate attention quickly. In the mid-horizon, measurement becomes an incentive landscape. People learn which metrics matter and internalize them. The proxy begins to move the underlying reality, sometimes for good, sometimes for drift. In the long horizon, measurement becomes governance architecture. The metric shapes what kinds of people succeed, what kinds of projects survive, what kinds of risks are tolerated, what kinds of stories are told. The system selects for those who can thrive under the measurement regime. The measurement regime thereby reproduces itself. A final caution about model limits. Because we cannot fully observe causality, we often mistake the map for the terrain. We see a metric improve and infer that the underlying system is healthier. But in complex systems, the relationship between proxy and reality is contingent. When you push on a proxy, the system changes in response. The act of measuring and rewarding is an intervention. This is why uncertainty matters. We are not merely reading the system, we are shaping it. So the paradox returns. We need measurement to coordinate at scale, yet measurement at scale becomes governance, and governance at scale can drift into a regime where the proxy becomes the purpose, not by decree, but by accumulation. When a metric becomes the mission, the consequences rarely arrive as a single catastrophe. More often they appear as trade-offs that are difficult to name because each step seemed reasonable. The costs are distributed, delayed, and sometimes borne by those least able to contest the measurement regime. It helps to distinguish consequences across horizons. Short horizon consequences, days to quarters. 1. Attention displacement. What is measured becomes talkable. What is talkable becomes agenda. In the short horizon, this can look like focus, fewer debates, clearer priorities, but it also means that unmeasured work, mentorship, careful thinking, relationship repair, deep maintenance, moves to the margins. People do it after hours or not at all. The system becomes efficient at the visible and fragile in the invisible. 2. Behavioral compression. When a metric is introduced, behavior becomes standardized around it. This can reduce variance and improve baseline quality. Yet it can also reduce discretion and local intelligence. People stop using judgment in cases that don't fit the template because deviation increases risk of being judged unfairly. 3. Conflict over definitions. Metrics require definitions: what counts, what doesn't, how to categorize edge cases. In the short horizon, disputes over definitions can consume energy. But there is also a deeper issue. Whoever controls definitions controls reality within the organization. This is governance by semantics. Mid-horizon consequences, quarters to years. 1. Selective visibility and silent failure. As reporting matures, the organization sees the metric more clearly than it sees the underlying phenomenon. People become skilled at telling stories with numbers. Problems that do not affect the metric become harder to justify. A failure can grow quietly if it lies outside the measurement field. This is not fear-mongering, it is a structural property. If a system does not instrument a domain, it cannot easily learn about that domain until a downstream symptom appears. 2. Incentive-coupled design. Products, processes, and services begin to be designed for metric performance rather than for user reality. This is subtle. The team does not say, we will degrade the experience. They say, we must hit the target. The design changes in ways that optimize the proxy. A common pattern: an organization measures what is easy to capture, clicks, time, volume, and then designs to increase it. The underlying value might be understanding, trust, or long-term satisfaction, harder to measure. Over time, the easier metric becomes the design center. Erosion of intrinsic meaning. When the metric is the dominant language of value, people who care about the underlying mission can experience a split. What they know matters versus what is rewarded. Some adapt by aligning their identity to the metric. Some persist in mission work, but become less visible. Some leave. The system gradually selects for those who can thrive in the measurement regime, not necessarily those best aligned with the deeper purpose. This is a second-order effect. Measurement does not merely evaluate performance, it shapes who remains to define performance. Long horizon consequences, years to decades. 1. Cultural hardening and brittle governance. Over time, the metric becomes embedded in governance artifacts. Job ladders, contracts, budgeting formulas, audit expectations, standard operating procedures. Changing the metric becomes equivalent to changing the institution's self-concept. The system becomes less capable of updating its proxies, even when they no longer track reality. This is how organizations become resilient to criticism, but not resilient to change. They can defend the metric while failing the mission. 2. Tail risk amplification. Metrics often optimize for typical outcomes, the median case, but complex systems are often governed by rare events. When optimization removes slack, reduces redundancy, or encourages tight coupling, the system may perform better until it fails worse. The long horizon danger is not constant decline, it is the accumulation of hidden fragility. The system can look excellent by its own measures, right up to the moment those measures cease to correlate with safety or stability. 3. Institutional moral outsourcing. A measurement regime can become a way of outsourcing judgment. Instead of asking, is this good? The institution asks, did we hit the number? This can feel fair and objective, yet it can also reduce responsibility to compliance with a proxy. People can sincerely say, we met the target, even when the lived outcomes are misaligned. This is not a claim about individual intent. It is a claim about how systems distribute responsibility. If accountability is tied to proxies, responsibility migrates to proxies. Now, notice the trade-offs. Measurement is not only distortion, it is also coordination. Without metrics, large systems become opaque, and decisions become arbitrary. With metrics, decisions can become consistent, but they can also become narrow. The trade-off is not metric versus no metric. The real trade-off is between different forms of ignorance. Without metrics, we are ignorant in ways that are hard to challenge. Decisions are made by persuasion, authority, and anecdotes. With metrics, we are ignorant in ways that are easier to defend. Decisions are made by numbers that appear neutral. No system is neutral. Every system encodes values. Measurement chooses what to honor and what to neglect. So the consequences are not a moral fable, they are a governance outcome. The measurement regime allocates attention, and attention allocates care, and care allocates what the system becomes. Time reveals failure modes, but time also reveals which systems were built to learn, and which systems were built only to report. The question was, how does a metric become the mission, without anyone deciding it should? One answer is uncomfortable in its ordinariness. Because everyone is trying to be responsible, inside the constraints they can see. A leader wants comparability across teams, so they choose a shared metric. A manager wants to protect their group from arbitrary judgment, so they rely on numbers. A team wants resources, so they present what is legible. An individual wants to be evaluated fairly, so they do what is measured. Each step is coherent. The system drifts anyway. In complex systems, drift is often not the product of a single decision, but the sum of many local optimizations. That is why blame is usually a poor diagnostic tool. The more useful question is, what does the system permit, constrain, and ignore? Here, disciplined humility matters. We should be cautious about the certainty of our critiques. It is easy to point to a metric and declare it wrong. But the alternative may be worse. Unmeasured domains can become invisible, and invisibility can be another form of harm. We should also be cautious about the certainty of our metrics. A proxy can be useful and still drift. A dashboard can be precise and still be incomplete. Uncertainty is not permission for neglect, but it is a reminder of model limits. When we treat the metric as reality, we forget that the world is thicker than what we can count. There is also a quieter question beneath the operational one. What do we want measurement to do for us? Sometimes we want measurement to provide truth. Sometimes we want it to provide coordination. Sometimes we want it to provide legitimacy, proof that we are doing well. These are not the same function. A metric that coordinates well may not reveal truth well. A metric that legitimizes well may be easy to optimize performatively. When we do not name the function, we can mistake one for another. And then there is the question of horizons. In the short horizon, we want progress to be visible. In the mid-horizon, we want incentives that preserve meaning. In the long horizon, we want governance that can update itself, constraints that can learn. But learning requires discomfort. It requires admitting that the proxy is partial, that success on the dashboard may not equal success in reality. Institutions often prefer the comfort of stability. Individuals often prefer the safety of clear targets. The system chooses what feels governable, so I will not offer a neat resolution. There may not be one that holds across contexts. Instead, let the tension remain visible. Measurement is necessary for scale, and measurement can degrade what it intends to protect. Metrics can be instruments of care, and metrics can be instruments of neglect. The same number can be a compass or a cage, depending on how it is embedded in governance. If we are to live with this honestly, we might hold one steady thought. The mission is what the system makes easiest to do. And when the system makes a proxy easiest, the proxy will over time begin to speak with the voice of purpose. The future is shaped by constraints, not wishes. Yet constraints can be designed to be revisable, and attention can be distributed with an awareness of what numbers cannot carry. That awareness is not a solution. It is a practice of reflection under uncertainty. Across every time horizon, the restraint to remember the proxy is not the purpose, is a form of governance. Scale multiplies error,